what it's like postpartum. So obviously if you have a bigger baby, if you have a bigger tear or more tears, third degree, second degree, I think then your recovery will be much more difficult. And the first P is kind of scary because you have to use muscles that just went through birthing a baby. And welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to do what it's like postpartum. If you didn't know, I gave birth to my baby boy Ezra, my first baby, about 3 months ago. And if you haven't already, you can click up here to watch my birth story. I basically tell you what it was like to give birth. But now I want to tell you what it's like after birth, because the postpartum recovery process is another very interesting thing that I was curious about when I was pregnant, because you hear a lot about how it's painful, it hurts, and it actually is worse than birth and pregnancy. So I wanted to give you my perspective on it and things that helped me. I'll also do a separate video on the postpartum essentials that I felt were really helpful, but this will just be about the pain or coping mechanisms, things that I experienced postpartum, which is basically after you give birth. I also have a video on my birth and labor vlog. You can also click up here to watch that to sort of understand a little bit about what I went through during my birth. So if you're interested in this video, then keep on watching. So I first want to preface with my usual disclaimer that every body is different, every pregnancy is different, every birth is different, and therefore every postpartum recovery is different. Mine will be different than yours, which will be different than someone else's. So I would really recommend watching a lot of these videos and doing your own research to understand what you might be going through after you give birth. For me, I had a pretty easy birth. Ezra was 5 pounds, 8 ounces, so he was pretty small. And I think that really helped to not make my birth as traumatic. I only labored for about an hour of actual pushing. And in terms of tearing, I only had a small inner tear. And then the doctor did have to cut a piece of my membrane because I guess it was blocking Ezra from coming out of my birth canal. So I had technically 2 tears and I did have a little bit of stitches, but I think my tearing was pretty minimum, which I think also makes a big difference in your recovery. So obviously if you have a bigger baby, if you have a bigger tear or more tears, third degree, second degree, I think then your recovery will be much more difficult. So that is one thing I wanted to preface. Okay, so the first thing that you're gonna experience when you, after you give birth is using the restroom. And so I think a lot of people talked about how this was really scary for them, especially the first poop. So actually the first pee comes first. My nurse said I had to pee a certain number of mils in order for them to clear me to get rid of my IV. And the first pee is kind of scary because you have to use muscles that just went through birthing a baby. So I would just recommend breathing through the process, sitting on the toilet, drinking a lot of water first so that you have a lot of pee to get out, and then just sitting on the toilet and breathing and sort of relaxing those muscles. You've peed for, how many years of your life by now. You know how to release the pee. You just have to think about it, even though you may not be able to feel it that much down there, especially if you got an epidural. By now my epidural had worn off, and so the first time I peed, very little came out, so I had to just keep drinking water and just getting more hydrated. And then the second time I had enough, so I got cleared to get rid of my IV, and it really wasn't that hard. Now after you go to the restroom, the taking care of yourself down there is a lot because you can't wipe with regular toilet paper, and that's because it's sore. Toilet paper is kind of rough, and that's why you see a lot of people using a peri bottle, and I'll talk about this in my essentials video. But essentially you need to pee, spray with a peri bottle, dab with toilet paper, then you would spray with dermaplast or some sort of numbing spray, and then you would create your mesh pad underwear package, essentially, with the mesh underwear, the pad, and maybe some witch hazel pads, and then put that all on. So going to the restroom takes a while. Just be prepared for that. Usually it took me a while to not only use the restroom and get everything ready, but then I had to create my pad. So just keep that in mind. Obviously, these things help to soothe yourself down there. I think the other thing is that you're going to be kind of sore. It sort of will burn a little bit, and that's why you need the witch hazel pads and you need the dermaplast to help you to really feel more comfortable when you're walking around or just sitting. So next is the first poop, which might happen the first day, might happen the second day. Your doctor should prescribe you a stool softener. Take that if the nurse offers it to you. Make sure you take it because it'll help immensely. Because you went through birth down there, it's hard to go to the restroom. It's hard to push out your first poop because your muscles are either sore or they're just looser. I don't know how to explain it, but it's just a lot harder to use those muscles. So the stool softener will really help you to not have to strain. I think that's the main thing, because you don't want to get hemorrhoids. For me, I really felt again that breathing was important. So when you're sitting on the toilet and you feel like you have to go to use the restroom, you just breathe. Like breathe as if you're birthing a baby almost, and everything will happen fine. For me, it was pretty easy. It wasn't painful. And then of course you're gonna spray yourself with the peri bottle, pat with toilet paper, and do everything else that you do after you peed. Okay, so now to talk about the pain and recovery portion of it. My recovery was actually pretty easy. I was able to walk and I didn't have to really lean on anyone. Sitting up wasn't that difficult. I would say though, they're gonna prescribe you an ibuprofen. Take the ibuprofen. They give it to you, I think, every few hours, and so I think that really helps to maintain your pain, because I didn't really feel it, but then towards the end when the ibuprofen was wearing off, I would start feeling the pain. And actually I took an ibuprofen or an Advil even after I left the hospital for, I want to say, several weeks, just in case, because there would be times where I didn't take it and I felt some pain or some dull pain. So I would just take the ibuprofen, if you're not against taking medicine, to really help you to recover and not feel pain when you're taking care of your baby and doing other things. And you probably heard that you do get cramps afterwards, especially when you're breastfeeding, so the ibuprofen helps with that as well. The cramps were kind of like a light period cramp. They weren't that bad. I didn't have that many of them, but some people might experience more than others. Oh, one thing I do want to mention too is that postpartum, the nurse will come in and press on your stomach to get rid of any of the blood and to feel around. So be prepared for that, because it's definitely uncomfortable. So in terms of the pain, getting in and out of bed is definitely difficult. I don't know if it was half psychological, half physical, but I just felt like my stomach and uterus area was very sensitive and kind of weak. And so I didn't want to put too much strain getting in and out of bed, picking up items. Even when, if you watched any of my other videos, we were gonna live with my parents for a month, which didn't end up working out, but we did stay there for a few days. And I remember unpacking was a little painful because I had to walk, and sort of making large strides kind of gave me some pelvic pain. I had pelvic pain in my pregnancy, so I don't know if that was why I had it during postpartum, but I actually had a lot of pelvic pain when moving. And so I had to sort of take a break and not move heavy objects, not walk a lot. I also kind of waddled because you're just feeling sort of weak down there, and it's sort of hard to function like normal. Another thing I felt was interesting was whenever I showered, I don't know if it was the heat, I felt kind of faint and weak. Like whenever I was soaping my body, I was very slow, and I kind of felt like if I were to raise my hands really high or like move too quickly, that it would it made me feel a little queasy and faint. I think my stomach was very jiggly too, so whenever I was putting lotion on it, it just felt very strange. That lasted about 5 days, and I think by the 7th day of postpartum, I felt pretty normal again. I was back to my old self. I was able to move more normally and not feel as weak in the shower. But for the first week, I definitely felt not like myself, and like my energy was not as high and my body was more sensitive. Postpartum bleeding, so I did bleed. The heaviest bleeding probably was for the first week, but I did have to wear a panty liner until about 3 weeks postpartum, and at that point I didn't really need it anymore because the bleeding had pretty much stopped. But you will bleed pretty heavily for the first, I would say for me, the first 1 or 2 days, where I use like those massive pads that the hospital gives you. But then eventually I just was able to switch to overnight, those orange always pads, and then I was able to switch to the green always pads and then panty liners. And on the bleeding was heavy, but not as heavy as people made it sound. After like the first and second day, your bleeding is pretty normalized, and then after that I probably didn't even have to change a pad that often if I use one of the green ones during the day. So you do bleed, and the blood will last for at least a month, but it won't be that heavy. Okay, so now I wanted to talk about my body, the physical part of it. At the end of my pregnancy, I weighed about 137 pounds. At the beginning, I weighed 118, and right after giving birth, I weighed 124 pounds. So I lost a little over 10 pounds, And now it's about 12 weeks postpartum. I weigh 118 pounds. So I'm back to my pre-pregnancy weight. I have not exercised. I have not done anything other than breastfeed and take care of my baby, which is a lot of exercise if you think about how much you're holding. You're bending down. If you're rocking your baby, you're rocking them. You're walking. You're doing a lot of things physically. That's not really exercising, but maybe that helped. I think breastfeeding, they say, also helps to shrink your stomach and your uterus. Here's a picture of me right after I gave birth, and here's a picture of me about a few weeks postpartum, and so you can see the difference. My stomach pretty much looks the same. The first few days, it was definitely bigger. I probably looked about 6 months pregnant, as what they say is normal, and then it just eventually went down. And I would say I definitely am a little more jiggly than I was when I first became pregnant. So my stomach is not flat like it used to be, but I guess I have a little bit of extra skin. It's not a ton. For the most part, I would say I'm pretty happy with my body the way it is. And again, this is not with me doing anything. I will preface though that I didn't gain that much weight during my pregnancy. I actually had issues gaining weight, and again, Ezra was very small, so that could be that because I didn't gain very much weight, I didn't have that much to lose, and it was easier for me to shed the pounds. So lastly, I want to talk about the mental aspect of postpartum. You hear a lot about postpartum depression, and I actually felt like I had postpartum anxiety. This probably means something different to everyone. For me, you're worrying about, is your baby safe? Is your baby going to die of SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome? We had this thing called the Bobby Lounger, which infants can lounge on, but they say they're not supposed to fall asleep in it because they could slide down and it would close their airway. And I was always worried, is he breathing? When he's in the car seat, is he breathing? Is a blanket gonna smother him? You just worry so many things about your baby. You don't know, is this sound normal? Is this normal? Does this look normal? And I think in general, I'm kind of a more anxious person, and I think about a lot of these things. So having a baby just made that tenfold. And I think another thing that I would say that I experienced, and I don't know if this is because of postpartum or hormones or if it's just me, it was really hard for me to enjoy my baby. Of course, I love Ezra and he's cute and I like playing with him, but there's a lot of the times where I'm frustrated with him. I'm frustrated that he won't go to sleep, that he's crying and I don't know why, when you're taking care of a baby 24/7, it just comes a lot. It just wears on you, I think, emotionally, and you just feel very drained. You feel like you're in a constant battle with him, waking him up, feeding him, putting him to sleep, trying to keep him entertained, trying to make sure his brain is stimulated. And it's just a lot to take in. And I remember I started treating him more of like a schedule. He was like a job instead of enjoying myself with my baby. I see other parents who seem like they're enjoying their baby more. They probably don't have as strict of a schedule as I did, but I was just so concerned about getting him to be able to sleep and laying good sleep foundational habits, making sure he eats well, making sure, and I'll also share in a different video about my breastfeeding journey, but I had low supply and so I had to pump. And so that was a whole nother thing I had to do. Basically for 15 minutes, I couldn't do anything because I was pumping. So all of these things tied together was just very overwhelming. And even though I was on maternity leave, so I had nothing else I had to do, it was just a lot. And I think that is really where most of my postpartum anxiety or recovery mentally was the hardest. Even now, 3 months later, I'm still struggling. There are still days where I get upset at him. I remember in the beginning when I had issues with my breastfeeding supply, I cried in the pediatrician's office because I wasn't able to supply the milk that my baby needed. You're definitely feeling a lot of high emotions during this time. It's easy to not get frustrated at your spouse because they get to sleep while you have to breastfeed, or my husband is working from home, so he obviously couldn't take care of the baby, but here I am constantly getting up whenever he's crying, constantly getting up whenever he wakes up from his nap, and my husband is just sitting there working on the computer. It's just hard, and I think you need to talk to your spouse, especially to help. And he is really good about helping me now. He helps since I have to pump, wake up in the middle of the night while I'm pumping, he'll feed the baby, or on the weekends when he's more free, he'll help feed him. So yeah, I would just say if you're struggling with any of this, ask for help, get help. I know a lot of people can't help necessarily because they can't, like your parents can't feed the baby unless they're taking a bottle. And even putting Ezra to sleep, I kind of don't really trust anyone else to do it because there's a certain technique we have to be working on. But they can help cook for you, clean, doing the dishes. Doing the dishes is annoying when you have so many bottle parts to clean. So yeah, I would say just ask for help in any way possible, even if you don't think you don't need it. So that is my postpartum recovery so far. I would say physically my body is pretty recovered. Mentally still working on that a little bit, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Again, my story might be different than other people's. I know my friend had trouble sitting for the first month, whereas for me I could sit pretty normally within a few days. Again, making sure you take that ibuprofen and the stool softeners. I also forgot to mention I took stool softener for at least another month afterwards too, just in case. I just did not want to get hemorrhoids. I did not want to have any issues. And eventually you'll feel like you don't have to use the peri bottle anymore. I thought I could do it because I wasn't having any issues down there, but after not using it for a day, I felt like the toilet paper was actually kind of drying out my vaginal area. And when you are breastfeeding, you have a little less, I guess, discharge or moisture down there. And so it feels much more dry and it's a little more uncomfortable. So I had to use the peri bottle for an extra few weeks. I almost want to say I used it for 2 months, the peri bottle. So of course, if you have any questions, please comment below. I'm not a doctor, and again, my experience is just one of many experiences postpartum, but I just hope that this video was informative to you guys. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!